Hi there, welcome back to the podcast of Wednesday's Child. You're joined today by Sarah and by Debbie, your usual hosts of this wonderful podcast, where we chat about all things eating disordered and disordered eating. We'd like to take you through our experiences and share some of the insights and questions that we've been getting into the Wednesday's Child inbox. And we thought we'd use a topic today, which actually, as much as it gets discussed in many of the referrals and requests for help that we get here at Wednesday's Child, it's not something we specifically explored. So I'm really hoping it might be useful to a lot of you out there. And that's about the resurrection of an eating disorder, or that kind of thing where you think it's long in the rearview mirror of your life and out of nowhere, it comes back and bites you on the backside big time. So what we want to talk about today is those strategies, techniques, and our own experiences for keeping it at bay, seeing it off before it becomes an issue, and looking at why might sometimes people be more vulnerable to a return of an eating disorder. So on that note, hi Sarah, welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. And I'm wearing yellow.
You are indeed, and it's a very mellow yellow. It's very cheery. I'm loving it. It does go really well with your hair colour. So if anybody like isn't kind of agreeing with me, you need to get off your audio podcast version and find us on YouTube, and then you can comment on Sarah's yellow top.
But this is quite like a statement about recovery, because like many folks, this isn't black or grey. And I went through that phase, as we all do often in an eating disorder, where I just shrouded myself in dark, dull colours.
Do you find yourself being really aware of that then when you open your wardrobe and you reach for a bright colour on a day like this? Do you think, aha, this is Sarah in recovery?
I do. I still think there's gaps though. I still need that magic clothing fairy I keep talking about to come and take me secret shopping. And I'd love one of those, the proper colour matches where you can go to the posh swanky shops. I would love one of those. If anyone's listening,
why don't we do it?
Sarah at Wednesday's Child.
Why don't we see if some people in recovery in our community would like it if we set up an event where we could do things like that, and we could have
that would be really amazing.
Speakers. Okay, I've gone and said it now. I've committed to it. Live on a podcast we recorded for your listening pleasure. But yeah, let's make something like that happen.
As long as I can be the first. I'll be the guinea pig. I don't mind going first.
We'll do a colour and confidence workshop for those in recovery from eating disorders.
Because I know we've been a bit flippant about it, but I think that would be amazing, because I do think it is a thing. I think it goes along with that identity. I've been reading a lot recently and listening to a lot of podcasts about how and where we hang our identity. And I've been listening to it from a businesswoman point of view as opposed to an eating disorder point of view. But I do think that it goes hand in hand, doesn't it? When you are recovering from an eating disorder, at some point you choose to totally disengage yourself with that eating disorder. Yeah. And with that actually comes learning about how to dress yourself, learning about your colours, learning about what makes you look alive again. So yeah, I'd be well up for that.
Yeah, it's all about identity, isn't it? And for too long, people that have been living with an eating disorder have become too wrapped up in the identity of the illness rather than thinking who they are, what they like, what they don't like. And that goes through everything. It's about how we dress and how we present ourselves to the world, possibly what careers we do, what things we do socially, what we engage in, right through to what the obvious kind of the pastimes and the hobbies and the sports and the activities, many of which all of a sudden we're not feeling obliged to do because our eating disorder wanted us to do. But actually we've got that time to do stuff for pleasure, not just for the sake of needless movement.
And giving ourselves permission to do things for pleasure and permission to spend a little bit of money on ourselves if we've got a little bit of spare cash hanging around. No, it's all so important. So yeah, it's a big thing. I think one of the reasons why I think maybe people get stuck is because they don't get support in that phase, that really important phase of recovery where you are trying to find the new you.
Yeah. And that moves us on really nicely when you talk about where you get stuck. Let's talk now then about where you can think that you are doing fairly well in your life in recovery or post recovery. You really are doing quite well for yourself, but for whatever reason, be it the infrastructure around you or the events that happen in your life, something pulls you back in to the lure of the eating disorder. And slowly but surely, you find yourself succumbing to the behaviours and the habits that you know belong to that illness and that you didn't think were part of your life anymore. Can you say at any point where that's been true of your own experiences, or do you think you did step well and truly out of it?
I think mine experience is quite different to many folks that we speak to, because mine was, late onset and a particularly specific moment in time. But there was definitely things that when I was going through the journey, because I did have a huge relapse after I came out of inpatients, and when I was actually going back to work. And for me, I put a lot of that around the idea that I'd recovered to do a something. I hadn't recovered. That's absolutely the wrong statement to use. I'd what was it? Nutritionally rehabilitated, sorry, in order for a specific focus, which was the first focus was to get out of hospital, and the second focus was get back to work. And in that process, I hadn't really worked on my head. And it was when I got back to work that it just went AWOL. It went crazy, because I was right slap bang in that environment where a lot of those behaviours had manifested themselves in the first place.
And how quickly did you start to identify that that was an issue?
Again, because I was poorly at that point, I didn't at the time. It's on reflection.
Right.
So again, I was dragged out of that circumstance, wasn't I? I was refused to go back, and I was dragged back into services. So I suppose for me, I didn't have that moment of anagnorisis. My moment of anagnorisis came when I knew I just had to recover back in that January of 2019. But I didn't feel it. I didn't know the behaviours were creeping back up until they'd kind of really got hold of me again.
And I think that would be true for a lot of people, because suddenly, when that kind of the cognitive reasoning is going, and actually it's all tied up with, if you're not as nutritionally rehabilitated as you might think you are, and you certainly haven't done enough of the neural rewiring to keep yourself on the right path, it doesn't take much, does it? It's everyday life that comes along. And I know that for me, when I first left treatment facility, and I was so determined about going and doing almost the extreme elements of everything I hadn't done. So there was almost this desire to prove to everybody I was so well recovered. So I spent the first few weeks of my life making a big deal about, we must go out and eat a big kind of, I don't know, a sort of the kind of takeaway type meal that I would never have done before. And we must stop at a coffee shop. And oh no, I won't just have one coffee. I'll have two coffees, and I'll have a cake as well. And shall I have a second cake? And it was almost like I was trying so hard to prove. And I think anybody that had seen me at that time would have known it was going to have to, it was going to bust. It had to, because you can't sustain that life trying so hard to just be chucking everything at it, while secretly inside you're wanting the outside world to see that you're recovered, but inside you're going, I don't know if I really am recovered, but I'm really, really testing it. And actually I feel really rubbish inside, and nobody else is going to understand that, because they think I've come out of treatment and they think I'm recovered. And then, it was this constant argument. And then all of a sudden I got kind of maybe 3 or 4 weeks in, and it all just reversed, and the behavior started back again. And it was really upsetting. But I suppose the difference was that, where I think the difference between what I see in the post bag an awful lot for Wednesday's Child is people that have been recovered for a much longer period, and then the drip back into an eating disorder is almost a bit of a surprise out of nowhere. It's kind of, I had an eating disorder in my 20s, maybe. I overcame it. I got married. I had a child. I'm a professional woman in my mid-40s, say. Life seemed okay, but all of a sudden I'm worrying about my weight. I'm hiding the amount of exercise I'm doing. I'm telling people I've eaten when I haven't. Or I'm secretly, after we've had that lovely dinner party with my husband and our wonderful neighbours, I'm the one sneaking off to the bathroom and finding a way to purge. It's those sort of letters that I read that I think are just so terribly distressing for that person, because that person truly believed for, say, 15 years that it was a historic illness for them. And I wonder whether even if we can unpick it during the course of this episode enough to say, what are the things that someone should be on the look for, and how does that person get help, people in that situation. I guess ultimately for me, the first thing I would say is, if you are in, say, the scenario I've just described, one thing to remind yourself is you have a family and a support structure around you. And I would say, speak up, speak out, and don't try and live that one silently. You know, you would hope that whoever you've got, that spouse, that partner, your parents, your best friend, if you don't feel able to have that conversation immediately with your husband, wife, whatever, have the conversation with someone, because living alone with the fear and threat of a returning eating disorder is ultimately so much worse.
And I suppose it goes back to that conversation that we kind of tiptoe around about, is real recovery, full 100% recovery actually possible? Now, we believe in Wednesday's Child that 100% full recovery is absolutely possible, and that we are very, very hopeful that every person that interacts and engages with Wednesday's Child will understand that and will go for it, and will keep going and going and going and going and going until they know they've cracked it. For me, though, I think recovery is possible, but I think it comes with but we have to have this set of things in our head that we know we're on the lookout for, in case suddenly it kind of starts to slip again. Because I think if we take our eye off what they are, so let me just think, what would there be for me? For me, there would be, if I was to go back on the scales.
Okay.
I think that's like for me, there would be a real tangible, if I had to go to the doctors, or if I was at a friend's house or whatever, and there was a set of scales in the bathroom, if I stood on those scales, that is one of my things in my list of, hang on, you've got recovery, but you've now just done this thing in your list, the eating disorders list, that I know if I stood on that scale, even just once, I know that the next day I would be, I need to find them skills again. And I'd be doing like we've spoken about before, I'd be that person going to Tesco, testing the skills out in the middle of the aisle, you know?
I remember doing it. Oh.
So I think it's about being really, really honest with ourselves, like you get in other recovery communities, that you can be a recovered alcoholic, but you've got to make sure that you're safeguarding certain things to not draw you back. And I think it's about that. And it's about being really honest about when something feels like it has become a secret. Because again, that would be the second thing in my bag of things to look out for. If I keep sticking my fingers up on the camera, second thing to look out for in my bag of things that might draw me back into recovery would be if I started to be secretive.
So the things that you know that you're telling slight kind of mistruths to your husband or your friends or whatever, or you're sneaking in behaviours and telling a different excuse as to why you needed to do that. You needed to park 3 miles away from the shop, or
Exactly.
You needed to buy this bread this week because this one was no longer good for you, or you thought perhaps gluten-free might be a good option. Those kind of sneaky beakies.
I went into the fridge the other day, and obviously because of, supply still isn't absolutely perfect up in Middlesbrough like we were used to, and clearly James had gone to the shop, and there was only skim milk available in the shop, and we needed milk for the cereal the next morning. And I woke up the next morning and I just shouted, "Who's bought bullshit milk?" And because it was like, look what's in my fridge. Oh my word, that red top is not allowed in my fridge. And I had to call it out immediately, and I just didn't have cereal. I had something else. But it's that again. There's number 3. So if I suddenly found that I'd bought there were some bullshit foods appearing out of nowhere again, there's a real sign for me that my brain is focusing on an old habit and not focusing on the new habits that I've worked so hard to put together.
So in a way, I think one of those things that people could do is think about having that real or metaphorical list in their mind of what are the things that would come back into my world and therefore would be identification marks of the fact that things were no longer going swimmingly. So whether it is jumping on scales, returning to exercise when I'm not really enjoying it, buying certain food products, lying in whatever form to friends and family, perhaps less socialization, kind of refusing, making excuses not to turn up at things. And actually, it's not really about tiredness, and it's not really about a busy schedule, but you're doing it because food was involved in that. So if you've got that list in your mind and suddenly you're thinking to yourself, hold on, I've done 3 of those in the last week, there is a problem here. I know I've done this. Maybe that identification is really important. And then saying to yourself, okay, I know this is creeping in. I know this is where I'm at. Do you think it's really important then to say what's causing it? Is that, what is or is it less important what's causing it and more important just to say, the shit is what it is. I'm here because my relationship's broken down. I'm worried about the cost of living. My job is absolutely crap and I hate my colleagues, or my husband's away for 6 weeks with his job and I'm lonely. Is it less important what's triggering it, and just more important that we say, whatever it is, I need the help?
Yeah, I think don't ponder too long on what's causing it, because that then's going to keep you going. That's going to keep you going down those behaviours.
It justifies it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It says, oh, well, I know. See, the thing is, I know it's just because my husband's away for 6 weeks, or it's because I've got these shitty colleagues. But when that shitty colleague goes, I'll get to grips with my eating disorder again. And when my husband comes back in 6 weeks' time, I'll stop my anorexic behaviours again. That's bullshit, isn't it?
Or it's if I can find out the cause of why this is happening, then I'll stop.
Yeah.
So I think just you have to just notice it and then respond immediately. I think once you go into that list, this metaphorical or I've got it written out, an actual real list. I think once you go back into that list, that's when almost like you've gone back into recovery. So you have to get your toolkit back out and do everything that you need in order to get yourself back into your recovered self. Then when you're back in that safe recovered space, that's maybe when to start doing some investigation about, right, I feel safe now. I'm comfortable and I'm confident that I've rebalanced those behaviors. Okay, where did that shit come from? And what? But at the same time, if you're then going through those conversations in your head, you can't then slip back into your list. You've got to keep in the recovered space. I mean, I was actually just yesterday, I was actually Googling any like group therapy in Middlesbrough. Not because I'm slipping back into my eating disorder, just because I'm just thinking, like I'm a bit sick of adulting at the moment, and I'm finding like things just niggling me, and like, oh, hang on, is my head going somewhere here? So I actually start to Google, like, is there a group I could join and just turn up and go, hi, I'm Sarah. I used to have anorexia. I just want to talk a few things through. I don't think it is an eating disorders thing, but I just want to talk things through because there's clearly something upsetting my brain at the minute, and not in any horrendous manner. But I think that for me is a real sign of I'm always going to be looking after myself. I'm always going to be looking after my head, and that's super important. The body is the thing that keeps us alive and keeps us going, but the head is the thing that keeps us recovered.
Yeah, that's so true. And I caught up with my best friend from uni at the weekend, and she was saying to me about the kind of issue around talking out when we go silent. She says, my greatest worry about you at any point is always when you go quiet and I'm not hearing from you. And she said, because then I think, like, does that void mean that there's a problem? And she's not good at articulating it, because she can recall that when I became really poorly, it was also a time when I became really introverted, didn't find myself able to articulate anything. And so that's kind of an area where it's a concern for her. So I can see absolutely your point that if you know that there isn't a sort of zone or a kind of comfortable place, eating disorder related or not, but where you can just speak up a little bit more and just say, oh, do you know, there's this nonsense going on in my life and I just want the opportunity to talk about it. I think that's good for all of us.
And you're not any less value or any less worth than folks in a group therapy that might be going through some really turbulent experiences at that time. I think sometimes we're afraid to go and look after our heads because we always assume that folks in that group are going to be having it much worse, so you're going to be looking like a bit of a fraud or whatever. But this is your reality. This is the life that you own. And I think, turning up somewhere and saying, there's just something not right in my head. And and through that group, you could be talking about, I used to have this horrendous mental illness. I'm feeling like she's knocking back on the door. He's knocking back on the door. So I just wanted to talk to some folks that might understand that feeling, that knot in your tummy.
And I would go as far as to say, actually, if you even think it's slightly selfish because your issue seems less different, whatever, or, not quite as current as somebody else's, actually flip it around the other way and say, what value can yourself and your experience bring to the person who's in that room, who is in a point of distress? Because regardless of the fact that they may not be going through an eating disorder or the specific thing that you did, something you say, some tool you have learned in the journey of your recovery thus far will aid that person. So the very fact of you being in the room and having a voice behind what you have been through and where you are today helps remind that person, oh, do you know what? That person moved on from this. There was a there was a golden light beyond this period, and actually they may take hope in hearing your story. So sometimes we have to kind of remember that actually just the very fact of being around people and sharing our story is a gift in itself.
Yeah, very much so. I often wonder what would it have been like for me when I was in day services in my real recovery if I knew Wednesday's child then. If I had my Debbie Befriender on my shoulder back when I was in services, actually I think that would have really sped up my recovery, my motivation, because of having someone not too far away in age, in circumstance, in beliefs, in value set that had been on this journey as well and was fighting. Yeah, definitely. Especially I think for those people you're talking about there that might feel like they're yo-yoing back into an eating disorder, you don't necessarily want to go into a service providing place, because then you're with people again that are potentially very, very poorly and really, really entrenched, and that can put you at risk. We've spoke about that a million times, but knowing where to go or who to speak to when you are on that kind of slight little wobble. And it's people that call out your bullshit. I mean, Debbie, I phoned you the other morning and I said to you, are you all right? And you went, yeah. I went, no, you're not. Come on. So like having someone that just knows you well enough, but appreciates and understands that sometimes those of us that have been through these traumatic events, we are going to wobble. It's about not going back, I think, is the key.
Yeah, absolutely. And just reminding yourself all the time that you're not alone with this, whether it's because you choose to reach out for the support of a community like ours, or because you've got that colleague or that friend or that partner in your life that is all too willing to hear what you're going through and to understand that it's not linear. The path to recovery isn't linear. And that would be true of so many other things that people go through, whether it's depression, whether it's alcoholism, whether it's gambling, whatever it might be. Anybody that's ever overcome anything finds that they have wobbles. And you like, even on the physical, many of you know that I'm kind of recovering from a broken femur, and I was saying I had a physio session on Monday, and the guy said to me, how are you doing? And I said, back taking the painkillers. And he said, you're saying that like you failed. And I said, I feel like I have, because I'd gone 4 days without needing, and I thought I was better. I thought my leg was fixed. And he said, it doesn't work like that. He said, you're rebuilding muscles all over the place. You're using tendons you haven't used for a while. You were in bed for a while where you couldn't even move a damn thing. You're improving, but just because you needed a couple of paracetamols to knock the hell out of you after you'd driven for 4 hours and your leg had gone a bit dodgy, like, stop beating yourself up. And absolutely, like, you find yourself almost laughing, going, oh yeah, you know what? Actually, even if I hadn't had a broken leg, I'd probably taken a couple of painkillers for this sodding leg after sitting in traffic for 4 hours. But, it's so easy to say, just because we get a little blip, that actually, oh, we've failed altogether. And I suppose that message that I would also add as part of this episode is, yes, spot the slip. So spot the slip of the symptoms, the behaviours and the beliefs, all that kind of, all the lying and all those subtle things like the bullshit milk in your fridge, all those things, spot them, but don't beat yourself up about them, and don't disaster think it. So don't think this is going to see me back in an eating disorder unit within 6 months. Don't disaster think it to that excess. Yes, be nervous enough to think, I ought to get a grip here. I ought to do something about this. But there are subtle ways to start to do that, like checking on your list, looking at what is it you've been doing. Maybe consider what might have got you there. Now think of your toolkit. Who are the people you can turn to? What do you need to put in place this week? Is it that you are now going to have a chat with your employer, and whether you mention your past or not, you can simply say, having a bit of a difficult time. Is there any way at all I could have a work from home week perhaps this week, so I can just get on top of myself a bit? We've got a few personal issues come. That would just allow you to get maybe your eating and your sleep pattern and your kind of rest routine, just get your well-being a little bit more in check for a few days. Simple measures like that, brought in at the very early stages of the slip, can make a fundamental difference, rather than just continuing another 3 weeks hence, where actually what was once or twice a day kind of, going for a walk or whatever, is now every day is an early morning walk. 5 times a week you're weighing yourself, and all the foods have been swapped for light diet and skimmed.
Yeah, and just safeguard the things that you need to safeguard in that same period. So it's brilliant if you, like you said, it's a great idea to speak to your boss and see if you can have a work from home week, or even if you just need to block out your diary so you're safeguarding 45 minutes every single day for lunch. And not, don't forget the other things as well. So for me, it's also the things that have got nothing to do with actually food, which would be a behavior thing for me. So like making sure that if you'd made a pledge to yourself that you're always going, like for me, I was made a pledge to myself that when I changed jobs in recovery, I was going to make time to pick Amy up from school. So if I suddenly found myself that my diary was always full around that kind of 3 o'clock period, then I'm back in driving and striving mode, and driving and striving mode sends me well back. So it's looking at anything that you think when you made a pledge to yourself, a sledges pledge. That's what we call them at work. I'm cheesy because they call me sledge at work. But when you've made a pledge to yourself in recovery of the behaviors you're shifting and the toolkit you're going to use, just keep making these new pledges, right? That's what I said I was going to do in recovery. So I'm going to make sure that that is what I stick to doing.
I think we should all come off this episode and do a sledges pledge.
Sledges pledge.
Whatever your pledge might be, make a pledge to yourself. As we always say on these episodes, if something that we've said today has resonated with you and you found this to be something that's sort of similar to where you're at and what you've been going through of late, share those stories with us, because it really helps us to share it with other people. We can do that anonymously, but it helps other people realize that they're not alone in what they're going through. And as ever, we're always working on different initiatives and ways that we can support you. There are some fundamental changes going to be happening to Wednesday's Child in the coming months, which we're really excited to revealing a little bit more, probably now the other side of the summer. But stay in touch. We're doing the best we can as a very, very small team. If you want to contribute, I'm just going to stress this again. I know we've put it out on social media a little bit. We are very, very tiny. We're tiny but mighty, isn't that right, Sarah? We're
Exactly.
Tiny but mighty. If you can spare a few quid to give us a donation to help us continue to do the work that we are, then we'd really appreciate that. We're coming up against lots of walls around trying to get funding at the minute. And I guess, in the cost of living crisis and where various pots of government money and post-COVID money is going, it is making it really difficult on organisations like us. But we want to be able to help as many people as we can. So feel like supporting us and doing something charitable, that would be very kind of you. But I won't milk the point too much more, but just to say, yeah, your support is always appreciated. And if you've got ideas for our future podcast episodes, then as ever, you can drop an email to hello@wednesdayschild.co.uk and tell us what you think about what we're doing. So that's it for this latest episode. Thanks ever so much for joining the Wednesday's Child podcast, and we will see you again in another episode really soon. Take care for now, look after yourself, and keep focused on recovery.